Since the 1900s, Fordsburg has been a place of historic and cultural importance. From its proximity to the inner city of Johannesburg, the suburb was always home to the working class. The area was not spared from the apartheid regime Group Areas Act, with Indian communities being forcibly removed. Today, SABC News' reporter Hasina Gori visited the area to look back on its rich history.
As we gear up for the elections at the end of May, we're focusing on various areas of interest as well as areas of concern. And today's spotlight is on Fordsburg. It's always been an economic hub in Gauteng, one that people from across the country, but also neighboring countries, came to for their wares, specifically for wares from the Indian subcontinent at that time. This has been the case throughout the year. Today, we at the Oriental Plaza, a highlight and a keystone of the economic hub here. I want to bring in Firdaus Bulbulia, someone who has been, living in the area, but also doing research in the area. Let's start with why was Fordsburg formed, if you remember, and its historic importance in apartheid times and in our democracy.
So Fordsburg really started in 1888, so it's a long time ago, and it was part of the then mining community. So this is the gold rush when everybody came to this area. So Fordsburg is part of a bigger neighborhood of the gold rush. The Oriental Plaza was only built as a result of people being forcibly removed out of fitas. Fitas mamitas, which is really fitas, my beauty, my love, my deliciousness. And people were moved out of fitas because of the Group Areas Act. And this Oriental Plaza became then a trading spot for all of those people who were forcibly removed. Now, what was ridiculous was they were moved out of fitas, which is just up the road, but they had to move their neighborhoods to Lenasia, which was really very far out of here. So they moved all the way to Lens, and then they had to travel every day to the Oriental Plaza, and this is about a 30-minute drive. The other interesting thing I think about the fact that it's Lenasia is that Soweto is very close to Lens, and people don't know that. So when the 76 uprisings happened, for example, people assumed that these were two vastly different neighborhoods. I grew up in Fordsburg. I was born just up the road in Lillian Road, and Fordsburg at the time was a mixed, it was mixed in terms of culture, in terms of people, but it was also mixed in that you had people who were the economic people of the country, but also people who were just ordinary teachers and so forth, and all of us lived there. So you kind of lived next to what would have been a building and a home and so on. The Oriental Plaza, I was probably 13 years old. I was in primary school. I remember running through the Oriental Plaza as it was being built. Importantly, where we are standing right now is what used to be the Red Square. And the Red Square is where the Defiance campaign took place. So politically, Fordsburg has always been a hotbed. If I go back to the 1880 period, 1888 was when, in fact, Jan Smuts, during the Smuts period, there was a reaction at the time of the gold rush where they didn't want the white, it was all white people, but it was the communists fighting for their space. And at that time, it was that black people working on the mines were suddenly brought in to replace the communists. So there was that kind of a hotbed there. There was an interesting introduction of women who were fighting the system, but they were fighting it as white people, white miners. For me, what historically is important is that people like Amina Kachalia, all of our stalwarts were from Fordsburg, and coming here, being part of the Defiance campaign, being part of the Red Square, which is a history that somehow got washed away, and we are re-talking about it, we're bringing it back. And particularly for me, as I do my PhD through the University of Johannesburg, I am talking about the Fordsburg Women's Group. We were a group of activists that started in 1983, talking about the system. So I was a teacher in this neighborhood. I grew up in this neighborhood. I was detained as a matric student, and actually detained just up the road at what was then the John Vorster Square, and is now, I think, just the Johannesburg prison. So the history of Fordsburg is embedded with a lot of politics, with the history of our people, with the history of even Gandhi. When Gandhi came here in 1908, he was resisting what would then have been the passbook for Indian people. And so if you go further down, you'd go to the Hamidia Mosque, and it is there where they burnt those passbooks. So that kind of political history is important, and people seem to have forgotten it. Now we have an influx of so many other interesting people who have come from the subcontinent, people have come from Asia, people have come from Africa, and it's a melting pot, which is what it has always been.
You bring me right next to where we are right now. If we fast forward, how have you seen post-democracy, Fordsburg, Oriental Plaza, this area that you grew up in, all those issues that you and many other stalwarts fought for? If you fast forward now, looking back in retrospect, have we achieved what was being fought for?
I think absolutely. We celebrate 30 years of democracy, and I think it is an important thing that we remind ourselves that this was a hard fought for and hard won democracy. People died for the struggle, and somehow people have forgotten that. And yes, we are concerned with corruption and the Zondo Commission and everything else that is happening, but we must remember that this space as it stands was a political space. It was a space in which people were forcibly removed and forced to come here and to set up shop. And they made it happen. As Indian traders, they made it happen. The transition now is that you have people who have come in from Pakistan and Bangladesh and other parts of Africa, whether it is Sudan or Ethiopia, and now you have this melting pot of people selling all kinds of goods, all kinds of different interesting spices, etc. I think what has happened post-apartheid is that maybe to an extent South African Indians feel left out in that process of where we belong, what is ours. And even for me, as I do a disruption in this area, you know, people come up to me and they say, "What are you doing here?" They don't imagine that I could have been born just up the road, you know, just a few streets away. So yes, I think post-apartheid, what it had done was it brought together more people of different ethnicities to come together and to celebrate. The other important thing, though, is in 1888, when Fordsburg was started, it was also a mixed group of people. There were Indians, there were white people, and under whites there were the Jewish people who came in. So people kind of lived and worked in the same area. They worked downstairs, they lived upstairs, and that kind of innovation around bringing in business, culture, life experiences was all within this one space. I think that has perpetuated. The thing for us, though, as we are Fordsburgers, and sometimes we come back and we almost feel like we don't belong anymore because so many people have moved out. But the influx of new people, I think, has been really rich and diverse and exciting.
As we go into the next elections, which is happening within the next 4 weeks, what are some of the changes you would want to see in the revival of Fordsburg, but just as a South African also, just in whichever area that you are residing in, the changes you'd want to see for that melting pot and for all those fights and the liberties that was fought for to continue?
I think what we really want is equity, and we need equity in education particularly, but also in business. And I think people need to realize that homes and housing was a big issue. So how do we ensure that people who had come out of a very depressed area where we spoke about Group Areas Act, which is now gone, but somehow we still live in those communities. We haven't been able to transition those communities. How can we do that? How can we ensure equity for everybody? When we talk equity, we're talking about electricity, food, housing, shelter, education. These are what we fought for. I was a student activist. I went to prison for this. I was a teacher in this community. We started the Fordsburg Women's Group. We were really concerned and we concentrated on our rights, on what is fair and just for everybody. What I would like the new South Africa, the post-South Africa, as we move into this new democracy, that some of these liberties that were hard won, hard fought for will come back. That people can say, I feel safe, I can walk where I wish, I feel safe, I can live where I wish. If we look at the crime rate, if we look at load shedding, if we look at just the streets, all of that is a big problem. We are concerned about all of the infrastructure. We need to fix that.
Thank you so much for those Bulia speaking to us here at the Oriental Plaza here in Fordsburg, one of the areas that we're highlighting for this election period as we look and go into the communities to find out what are the concerns, the history of those spaces, many of them, as we heard in this specific one, a place where democracy was fought for and a place that was always a political space.